Hello and welcome everyone on this Wednesday afternoon or evening or morning, wherever you're finding yourself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Melanie Tanilian, the director for the Center of Armenian Studies here at the University of Michigan. And I welcome you to today's film screening and conversation with Oksana Mirzoyan. Before I introduce our guest, I would like to thank my colleague, Catherine Babayan, who drew my attention to the really wonderful work of Oksana, and of course, Naira Tumanian, who put this event together and whose input shaped much of today's conversation. I also would like to alert you that today is Giving Blue Day. The Center of Armenian Studies is running a fundraising campaign this year around, and you will find the information on Facebook as well as on our website, to establish a graduate student fund. We have a very amazing group of graduate students who study here at the University of Michigan, and we want to make sure that they have sufficient funding to conduct their research and can concentrate on their studies. So we encourage you to donate however much you can, and we of course very much appreciate it. As always, I would like to invite you to submit your questions in the Q&A function at any time, and we will try to answer them as they come in. And today's webinar is a bit different in that I will introduce our guest, and we will view a number of short films and photographs, and then we will simply have a conversation. And again, I would really like to invite you to be part of that conversation with your comments and questions. The work of Oksana is really, really fascinating, and I think there's a lot that we can bring out in our discussion. So we are very excited to add today's guest to our Artist Spotlight series highlighting Armenian women filmmakers this last year. And you may also view earlier conversation with filmmakers Tamara Stepanyan and Garine Torosian on our YouTube channel. But this afternoon, we welcome Oksana Mirzoyan, who is an Armenian American artist and film writer and director. She was born in the former Soviet Union in the city of Baku in Azerbaijan, and her family became refugees after fleeing the Baku pogrom in 1990. Which was a 7-day orchestrated violent attack on the Armenian community in that city. The pogrom, as many of you know, was not a one-time event, but only one among a series of ethnic violences against Armenians living in Azerbaijan in the context of what would become the Nagorno-Karabagh war, the legacy of which we, of course, are still living with. The Mirzoyan family managed to immigrate to the United States and eventually settled right next door in Detroit. And what is really neat is that Oksana, who's going to join me in a minute, earned her degree in art history from the University of Michigan. And we may say that for us, she's really a very local artist. She's deeply rooted in the Metro Detroit area. Not only was she selected to be a Kresge Art Fellows in 2016, and the Kresge Arts in Detroit is an important aspect of the foundation's investment in the artistic community of Detroit, providing support to artists living and working here in Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb counties. And also she has accredited some local fame by having her own experimental and narrative film screened in a solo exhibition at the Detroit Institute of Arts and Arts Film Theater, which is, I think, a really fantastic honor in the context of our own community. But of course, her artistic reach goes well beyond our local realm here. I'm just incredibly happy that we have a local artist joining us. But her films have been screened internationally at film festivals, including Clermont-Ferrand in France, in Poland, the Freiburg International Film Festival in Switzerland, the DokuFest in Kosovo, and her short film 140 Drams took top prizes at the Best International Short Films at Izmir Film Festival still in Turkey. It received honorable mention at the Pomegranate Film Festival next door in Canada, and was recognized by the ICG Emerging Cinematographer Awards also here in the United States. Her first feature film, a project that we will be talking a little bit about today, Abysm, received the Locarno International Film Festival's Opens Door Prize. Her films, you will see, and in particular her upcoming feature films, are what she herself calls a metaphysical meditation on identity, war, and the past. Viewing her work, I believe we follow Oksana's intimate encounter with what she refers to empty spaces, a journey really marked by loss and trauma and circumscribed, of course, by the war in Nagorno-Karabagh. With her films, Oksana wants to put a trauma in her life to rest peacefully, she writes. And really the sort of corpus of her work for me highlights the wounds of the conflict lingering in her personal story. And I can only imagine, of course, that these wounds have been unsealed in the most recent defeat of the Armenian forces and the expulsion of Armenians from the territory of Artsakh. I now welcome Oksana Mirzoyan to our Spotlight series, and we will proceed by having Oksana show us a number of her works and then engage in discussion.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me part of this talk. Also to Melanie and to Naira for organizing this. And also thank you to everyone attending. I see so many names of dear friends and family members, so I'm very grateful all of you are here with me today. Let's talk about Karabakh and Artsakh and Shushi and everything we're trying to all put words to recently.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know where to begin. I think it would be wonderful to start with my passport photo. If Nair would so graciously share her screen, I think that's a good place to start, because I think within the context of my narrative, this is where my connection began to this country, how important it was, the right to self-determination of the people of Karabakh, the Armenians there, and how it changed my life trajectory, because I was born in Baku. My father was born there. My family has a history there. My mother was born in Goris, but my mother's side of the family also for a period of time was living in Baku, and myself and my sister, as you can see, were born there. This is my passport photo that was taken in Russia when we were in about 1990. We were already there, but when we were granted refugee status and given asylum in the was where we're planning to be given asylum, we were had our passport photos taken, and this is my photo from a very annoyed look at my expression. I was not happy with what was going on, but yeah, and it's kind of so clear. It's always been, I've shared this photo and it's been part of my installation work before, but it's been such a clear defining moment for me, because there it is again, words written and just kind of the stamp on my life that, you know, being a refugee, what does that mean? And especially how, because that war was in a state of ceasefire for so long, it continued that narrative, and it's still continuing for me even now, because I don't exactly have kind of my mind wrapped around what has happened there recently. Yeah. So this is the photograph that I think really set off a lot of my identity, and that began, and then it's like in 1991, and I think it's also that time is so important for the Soviet Union, because Karabakh started to want to separate itself. It was always part of Armenia, but it was given to Azerbaijan as a way, I believe, to create division in the place. You know, I believe colonial powers always take a certain group of people, give it to another group of people to govern over. That way, control. If Russia was the controlling power, then they are the ones that you fall back to. So, and then once this power started to collapse, the Armenians there wanted to join back with Armenia, and then it kind of set off this chain of events. And I really think it was a big part of that domino effect that led to the fall of the Soviet Union in 91. It was, as my mother says, we were crossing the bridge as it was burning, because once we arrived in the US, it fell like a few months later.
Yeah.
So it was a really hard time to be transitioning out of the Soviet Union, running from Baku. We were there when the 1988 earthquake happened, and in Yerevan, and then we went to Moscow in 1989. I think we were already there, and then it was waiting in the bread lines and really seeing how this structure was collapsing, and then people wanting to have their own identities back, that we weren't all comrades. We weren't all peacefully living underneath this roof. Like there was an identity there when we were all Soviet, but that there was always underlining aggressions, I believe, towards each other. And I think that's what takes us into maybe our next work, which is Baku.
Yeah, so Baku, of course, presents a big part of your work, and I think let us look at the film, and then we'll talk a little bit about what Baku represents in your own work and your memories.
So there's no sound to this, and I really do encourage everyone to take a moment and look at this film in their own time. I know that the links were sent out before, but this is essentially found footage, 8mm film that my great uncle, who was also living in our Baku at the time, took of his friends at just in a house right outside of the city. I believe this group of friends is composed of both Armenian and Azeri boys, and I'm sure Russian and maybe even Jewish boys, because those communities were really intermingled in that city. It was a very international city, so a lot of people were living together, and they're just being boys. Like, it's just such a carefree and such a light film that he took of this really lovely space and this very carefree time in his life. And also having film during that time was so hard to come across for him. And I only met my uncle in, when I moved back to Armenia in 2011, and I hadn't really known him throughout my childhood because we, as refugees, couldn't afford to go back to Armenia for a long time. And I really established a relationship with him. He had a love for film. I have a love for film, and we bonded over that. And then one day he just gave this footage to me and said, why don't you do something with it? And I just decided to make this loop that was later on commissioned shared by the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit. Yeah.
So what strikes me in of course in this film, on the one hand, I'm really interested, and you of course talked a bit about it, like how are you, where does this footage come from? I mean, I would be more also interested in how it traveled with your uncle, if you know. But then also what strikes me is this display of masculinity. And so you're using this film, of course, in your artistic journey as an artist to also remember Baku in a way, I think, or to pay homage to a past, a nostalgia of a home. And I would like to hear a little bit about, as this is a very sort of masculine display of pleasure and free time and enjoyment, where do you position yourself in this work? And that is so much about a loss of home also, that probably your remembrance of that home is probably quite different from that of your uncle's perspective in this particular film. But it is in this case a form of nostalgia that is so specifically framed around this sort of masculine sociability of playing soccer and enjoying sort of the countryside and so on. So where do you position yourself in there, and why did you choose this particular part of the footage?
So there's so much to talk about with this one. So my uncle I don't know how he got so much film out, because he will sometimes just pull out 120 millimeter film and would give it to me, like very old Soviet film that's probably expired, but he'll just give it to me out of nowhere. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just sure that it traveled with them when they fled. I don't know exactly how that journey was, because he's so quiet about these things. And as we really know, with a lot of former refugees from the who went through Armenian genocide and who's also experienced genocide and Holocaust, are very quiet about those experiences, because to
Yeah.
recollect those stories brings back pain that hasn't been integrated into their psyche, and they don't have the emotional capabilities maybe yet to be able to process it, but or will ever, because it's such trauma. But the masculine part of it is, so there's two things. Let's talk about the nostalgia, because I do think it's about, for me, it's almost like a phantom nostalgia, a phantom
Mhm.
identity, because I hear how my parents talk about Baku, how one of my family members speak about it. And for them, they experienced some of their best lives there. They were young. When they were growing up, the Soviet Union was functioning quite well. So they had a lot of things taken care of. They had school, they had after school sports, like, like their lives were very like idyllic in some ways. And we always hear our father specifically speaking about this, how great it was. And then my uncle and my aunt, the one that gave me that footage, also speaks about this too, that he found it to be so wonderful. And then their whole life was disrupted, and a lot of people, unfortunately, their life didn't go in a better direction after that. For some it did, but for others it did not. And I think this is part, for me, I remember it differently. I remember our balcony, I remember the courtyard. I have a desire to imagine what my life would have been like if we'd stayed. So I think this is the phantom part, because it can never be true. But for me, I don't have that same relationship, but I can imagine what my life would have been like if we stayed. Um, and that's part of me playing around with this idea of memory. It's also such an interesting piece of 8 millimeter film, because it's faded. He didn't process it correctly, so it only came out as yellow.
Mhm.
And I thought that was just so interesting visually, because it gives it this texture of being like a memory, and
Yeah.
film always does that. And then the masculine aspect of it, it's interesting, because I've been exploring my own masculinity. Just how does that, not gender, but I believe masculine and feminine energy is in both of us. And I'm always curious about that masculine side to things. I will later on talk about my relationship with the Armenian army, because that's such a masculine force. But my presence in it has also been quite destructive for them at times whenever I visited. But I think I don't understand that world, and I'm still trying to understand what's the masculine part of this reality. And I think about just war, and then the masculine aspect of war. How is it different from the feminine? I think war is masculine for me. Like, that's always been the association. Again, it's not about gender, it's about just kind of the expression of something. So I'm still exploring that. And yeah. And I think also I've had this idea maybe of being a little bit envious of
Mhm.
the roles that men get to play, where they get to go, their access and spaces. And I think when I was younger, I was constantly reminded of that. So I was always curious about what would it be like to be a boy,
Mhm.
and being able to have access to places. Now I know that's just a way of thinking, because I have the same access everywhere pretty much. But yeah, when I was younger, I was thinking about this a lot more. But yeah, it's just such a it's such a nostalgic piece of film loop, and it ties my identity to my uncle, who I didn't know, and really didn't know because of this war, and our family was split apart because of it. So it's kind of bringing it back together.
Where does this film fit in your trajectory as an artist, right?
Mhm.
Because maybe that gives you a little bit of an opportunity to talk a little bit about how you came to use film as an expression of of your art? Because that's not how you started. Just from
No.
talking to you before, film was not something that was on your primary radar when you were beginning as an artist. But so if you think of Baku, 1977, where does it fit into your artistic trajectory? Had you done film before? Is this the sort of first foray into it?
So film, like the physical film, I've only been using for a short amount of time because I grew up, so basically, and now I'm thinking about other things that I want to say about that Baku film, but I'll go back to that. But but my love started really with storytelling. I started writing plays when I was about 12 years old and being in theater, and I really loved that aspect of performance, and I started in front of the camera. And at 16 I was running around Detroit with a lot of guerrilla kind of filmmakers who were making features for like $500. I, like really just limited budgets, but everyone was in on it. We wanted to do it, and I understood what it meant to physically make a film versus the idea of it, and how you just needed the will. As my mom says, you just need the will to do something. So, and then film as the medium itself, I started experimenting more with it in 2007. It's such an unfamiliar thing to me because as a filmmaker, I came up when digital was kind of entering into the independent film world and really democratizing what it meant to make film, because before it was so inaccessible because film is expensive, and it still is very expensive as a medium. So I started working with it later on in 2017. I shot first on 16 millimeter. Then in 2019, I worked with this 8 millimeter found footage. And now I just recently shot another few pieces on 16, and it just feels so much more precious. It's a different relationship, but to the actual textual part of it. But I'm still on the fence whether I think film, for me, film is digital or the actual film itself, but I'm still in between those worlds of, I still love digital filmmaking and I think it's incredible. And yeah.
You said you wanted to say something else about Baku.
Yeah, so the big question of that, I just wanted to note that the big question of that film was, the question was, were they happy before the war? Because I think this is an important thing that I wanted to talk about. My father really says that people were happy. My mom has a different recollection of, she faced, I think, more discrimination because she was born in Goris. She was came from a much more Armenian family. Like my father's mother, my grandmother, she had a Russian last name. But my mother's side was very much more Armenian and much more rooted in their identity. And she's recollects a moment where she had blatant discrimination at university. My aunt would say, she was like a very well-respected physicist, and she wasn't getting opportunities that other people were because she was blatantly told, because you are Armenian. So even though I wanted to ask a very simple question, because even though there was this veneer of everyone is equal under the Soviet Union, there was still discrimination and microaggressions happening even before that led to what Karabakh needed was to detach from Azerbaijan and to, So that's all I wanted to add to it.
Great, thank you. So another place that seems to be really close to your heart is Shushi. And we know, of course, that many things happen in Shushi, but you spent some time there filming. And I think we should move to those two films.
Okay.
And then we'll have a conversation around those. And please, anybody, add your questions to the Q&A for Oksana.
So I'll speak a little bit about this one as well. This is honestly came about so spontaneously. I don't think we can hear the sound, but the sound is of swallows flying. And they just, I was in a balcony with a friend staying there as a research trip for my feature film, and they just started swirling around. And I captured them so spontaneously, but it's been a piece of film that's connected, I feel like, most to people, and it was just such a spontaneous, such a organic thing that happened, and also just feels quite heartbreaking right now looking at it, because it's not accessible anymore. And the next film is actually also related to a friend of mine called Barber of Shushi, where I think during the next trip that I had after the 2016 eruption of violence, I went in 2017, and we visited a barber. A friend of mine just needed a haircut, so I'll be quiet because there's audio.
Կռվի պատերազմի ընթացքան են, չեմ աշխատել, մնացածը 40 տարի աշխատել եմ որպես վարսավի։ Ումի Շուշի։ Շուշի։
Սակայն ես վերում մի քիչ կլորացա, են անգամ աստի սիրուն կրոչ եմ, բայց երկու օրից սախ ննում ականջիս։
Շուշի տարի։
Ջան, ես ասեմ ալարվապանից դուս կամ։
Ադի վեր շատ բարձրացնում։
Գիտեմ, բայց շատ մի բարձրացա, պրոստը որ նայ։ Լավ, շատ լավ։
Տարած համոստանաս։
Դեռ պատրաստում։
So I encourage our audience to watch Oksana's films on your own, as the streaming over these Zoom webinars is not perfect. As you saw, it was skipping a little bit. So please watch it on your own at your own pleasure one more time, because it's really really fantastic. So if we're thinking about Shushi, of course, this has, it's an important reference point, I think, for Armenians, and at some point in history it was known as the sort of Paris of the Caucasus. And as we know, Shushi's province was part of the Republic of Artsakh, but in the recent war was occupied by Azeri forces, and many people were expelled in the course of the military action. Thousands of Armenian families had to leave, and of course cultural artifacts of the city, including the Holy Saviour's Cathedral, were destroyed. It is, I think, for you and your sort of personal artistic journey, it must be another really great loss, as you spend significant time in the city filming and thinking also about your new project. The films that we now saw, for me, represent sort of a juxtaposition of a landscape that is emptied of humans versus this sort of very intimate moment of human relation that highlights the continuity of everyday life, even in this sort of space of constant tension, constant conflict, even under ceasefire. And I would like to hear a little bit more about your experience in the city. So can you take us with you into the city a little bit, and what your thinking behind these two projects were?
Yeah, so the city is so unique because it's so historic. It sits above the capital of Stepanakert, and when you go there, you have to go up this very winding road. And it's a very strategic city, because if you have control of it, you have control over Stepanakert. Unfortunately, because of its military position, it's on a hill. You can, strike down from it. So it's very important. During the first war, when it was captured, it signaled the winning of the war, basically. So now when we lost it, it signaled that we lost the war. So for me, I had always, in all my history of going to Karabakh, only stayed in Shushi. It was only until 2019 that I had stayed in Stepanakert, in the capital. But I always, for some reason, gravitated towards staying in that city. It's very, it is quite desolate in some ways. It reminds me a little bit of Detroit, because there's a lot of ruins. There's a lot of ruin structures that were abandoned after the first war in 1994, but it has a lot of life going on because people who committed to staying in it really committed. And then there was a lot of refugees also from Baku, from Sumgait, from Azerbaijan, who are Armenian, who came and populated the city. And right now, what I'm thinking about is how now with this cycle of war, I can't imagine that they've been displaced again 30 years later, because the city is now gone and they can't live there. So my relationship with it has always been very intimate, staying in people's homes, being with friends there. Like I said, the film that I've captured of the birds, the swallows, was from a friend's balcony during a research trip. Also, that barber was very spontaneous, capturing that interaction. And that particular person that's getting the haircut, he's also someone who works for Halo Trust. So he works with demining, a demining organization that was and still is right now removing landmines from the region. And so it's just, there's a lot of interactions going on between in there that are very, and then there's, I don't know how to describe it. There's something about Karabakh and something about that city that's also so, they're very proud, they're very kind, it's quite an intimacy because of how small and how they have to rely on one another. And right now it's quite, there's also a school there that the Royal Arts School that was featured, like that I really thought was going to be a very important scene in my feature film that has to be written out now. And there's mosques in the city. Something that I really loved about Armenians is that we took care of those mosques. We were even restoring one of them. I also remember traveling all throughout Karabakh and throughout this region and seeing how the Azeri grave sites hadn't been disturbed, which I was really proud of us. I think this is something that I always held, like that, you know, we're not touching the mosques, we're not touching the graveyards, and this is something that I was always quite proud of, and I wanted to show this in Abyssum, and I hope that I get to still show it in my feature. Yeah.
I just recently read this beautiful piece by Viken Berberian about Shushi, and I want to read you a piece of it and ask you a question about it. So he wrote in the New York Review about Shushi and referencing sort of the destruction and of course the denial of history. He writes, while the apocryphal stories continue, or will one day both sides acknowledge the other's memories? For answers, we can revisit the pages of Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. The city of Zora is like a honeycomb, he wrote, in whose cells each of us can place the things he wants to remember: names of famous men, virtues, numbers, vegetables and mineral classifications, dates of battles, constellations, parts of speeches. And what if Shushi too were to become a honeycomb, in whose cells memories coexist without vitiation or privileging one over the other? And I thought that was such a beautiful way of thinking about this place. And I'm wondering, if you were to place memories into this honeycomb, what would be those memories?
I think one of my fondest memories was me driving a car that I rented up to the city. I don't know why I found that to be so, I love driving because we are from Detroit. Like it's just, it's always felt like such a sign of freedom when you can get behind the wheel yourself and take yourself anywhere. So for me, being in Armenia and in Karabakh and driving myself was, for the first time, it was so exhilarating. Wandering its streets, especially at evening times or really early in the morning, because they're quite old and all stone lined. And I think that's a very important one. Lots of dinners with friends, lots of smoking cigarettes. It was like, that was a big part of it. And it was a lot of like dancing and parties. The time when I came there were, you know, horovats, those barbecues, and having a lot of people come together. And eating zhengilov huts, like really like warm memories. I remember once one of my friends' homes that I was staying at, his son who was a soldier came home just for an hour. We were having dinner with him, and all of his aunts came over to say hello to him and see him. And then he had to go very quickly. And when he was leaving, it's like so clear in my mind, all the women cornered him and are trying to like stuff his pockets with like candy or cookies, and he's refusing it, but they're all, like smothering him with love and absorbing him in that before he's about to take off, and he just was kept refusing it. But he finally gave in and took something and left. And I just remembered that scene. So there's a lot of warmth in that city, a lot of cultural history, and also the shared reality that the Armenian Christian identity and then the Islamic identity there. And this is a hard thing to I think when I heard you speak about Viken's words, how do we acknowledge both of those realities? Because I think right now it's like one or the other, and there's very little crossover. And I'm trying to understand, how do we bridge those things? Like, what are our memories and what are the other memories, whatever that means. Right now, in this case, it's Azerbaijan. And how do we connect those two? Because I think we are it's just hard right now because the wounds are very fresh.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about a conflict that's been continuous for so many years. So it's hard to, and with the more recent violence, of course, it's hard to sort of move beyond, right? And so you're describing to me a memory that's warm, a city that's full of life. Of course, that has these divided memories, perhaps. But in your sort of experience, I see that there's something sort of very connected to sort of the society and the sort of human interactions. Yes. And we talked a little bit beforehand, and we talked about your new film, your first feature film, and we're really excited, and we will of course show it at the University of Michigan once it's out, and obviously we'll love to have you back. But when we talked about that film, I felt that your experience was not necessarily this warmth that you're describing, but rather you had a very different kind of encounter. Can you tell us a little bit about how this film continues sort of your journey of grieving a lost home, a lost past? And can you tell us about the film? What are you hoping to represent for the public as well as for yourself? You mentioned in your writing about the film that it represents for you a moment to put your trauma peacefully to rest. And I'm wondering, obviously you started thinking about the film way before December and November of 2020. How is that playing out now? How is this current conflict? How is it shaping and reshaping and creating new challenges for your work? Okay, that was a lot now that I'm putting on the table for you to think about. But yes, I'll let you tackle that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think my relationship with what happened before was there was a lot of trauma that I didn't understand, and it was only in the last few years that I've been able to put words to it. But my relationship with Karabakh is almost like this piece of land. It was given to you almost like as and I don't want to say this, but it's like what is given to you for what was lost. So in a way, my relationship with Karabakh was really about reestablishing my identity to the past and what have we gained. So in 2011, when I first came to Karabakh and I went to the front line for the first time, that's when the idea came about. I went to see the soldiers, and I was I don't remember which border it was, but it was really the front line. And I think it was like a 200-meter mark between us and the Azeri side. And I spent about an hour with them. I got to look out over the loophole and over no man's land. And it was just so surreal to me because it was this empty space that two countries who are continuously at war with each other are responsible for, and knowing that this land belonged to both of us. And also just feeling the fact that this was probably the closest that I might ever get to go back to see Baku or Azerbaijan, because we're not allowed to go into it. And really my interaction with the soldiers started the idea for a film. Afterwards, I just had this image come to me of this soldier who was sitting in an empty barrack on the phone speaking to somebody, and it just couldn't, I've never been able to let go of it. And I kept thinking, what is he saying? What is he talking about? And the film really is set in the structure of 40 days of Armenian mourning traditions. How do we mourn the past? How are we able to grieve and let go of the past? And I think that's really important for us to try to figure out. It's really hard right now because the war erupted again. And when I was working on it, we were very much still in a state of ceasefire. So for me right now, I need to be able to go back this year, hopefully, and really understand what does the landscape look like now. Because again, after this war, another part of the land has been closed off to me, closed off to all of us. But for me, it feels like the continuation of something that has already happened. And I feel like some people have asked me, like, how are we supposed to grieve this? And they are grieving it, where I feel like I'm not grieving it anymore. Right now, I feel very fired and very inspired to take action, because I feel like I'm done grieving this. We need to take action right now because it's becoming more and more critical. So the film is really about the masculine and the feminine side of war. It's about a set of twins who are 19 years old, and the male twin is serving on the front lines of the war. His body is found in no man's land, and no one will retrieve it because they fear that the ceasefire will be broken. It's set before the 2020 war. And his twin sister sets off to go get his body back and perform his last burial rituals before the 40 days of mourning are up. And it's this kind of journey into, I always think about Ovid and Dante's like journey into the depth to understand like who she is, what happened. And as she's getting closer to his body, we're following him as he's getting closer to his death. And there's these two running timelines, and they're intertwined with each other. And how did he die, and how did he end up out there? And then how is she getting closer to figuring out that mystery, and what does it reveal? So this is what the project is about. And it's about really the masculine and the feminine side of war. I think the feminine has been there for a long time to clean up what has happened afterwards. Of course, fathers are grieving, but the way I've seen and sat with mothers who are grieving the death of their children has been incredibly painful there, because soldiers were dying there all along the 30-year ceasefire. It didn't just happen recently, but there was constantly eruptions of violence on the line. And I sat with a lot of those grieving mothers to understand their psychological state. And I just feel like they're the ones who are really grieving this, not only from the Armenian side, but I do feel from the Azeri side too.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to say about that more.
No, absolutely. And within your artist statement, you so beautifully connected it to Antigone. Do you want to say a few words about that? How do you see this new film connecting to Antigone and her sort of journey of grief and the inability to bury her brother?
Yeah, so like in a way, she's such an interesting character, because we forget that she had two brothers that were fighting on both sides of the war. And the one that wasn't allowed to have his burial was the one that was fought on the wrong side. whichever that was, but she decided that she's going to defy the law and go out and give him a burial anyway, because he doesn't matter which side you were fighting of, he was deserving of it anyway. And I also think that that's so interesting in the film, for my ideas, well, not only of a really feminine heroine going into a war and defying the laws to do some, to as an act of compassion and kindness. But I also really think about those two brothers, because I do think about the Azeri and the Armenian side. We are the two people who are in this battle together, and we have to confront each other eventually. There has to be some kind of a resolution. And I know that's so hard for me to even speak of, because I'm so against war, but I even understand my own feelings when it comes to this conflict. Like, yes to a military, yes to, like, you know, to defending ourselves. And I completely let go of these philosophical beliefs and become very practical of what we need to defend our homeland. But I do think about her two brothers in that story, and who's deserving of burial and who's not, and why that is, because those ideas can change back and forth just in terms of perspective. So I wanted to see a very powerful woman on screen, my female twin. And yeah, I wanted to reflect this I've always found that story to be so inspiring. So I wanted to base my film upon that narrative.
Yeah. It is a very inspiring story. So I was happy to see you referencing it. So I would like to go to some of the audience questions. So if people are having questions for Oksana, please type them into the Q&A. And I think, Oksana, you can also see those questions, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's go to Jay Scott's question. He's asking, what media, if any, do you use to collect stories? Anyone you choose may hinder the free exchange of thoughts and feelings. If you choose none, you risk the vagaries of memory.
Yeah, so Jay and I have worked on my previous films and creating sound design. He's an incredible sound designer, and we worked so much on so many of my projects together. What media, if any, do you choose to collect stories? I think it's just myself, and I think I do it through photography more than anything, because I do it through video, but I go more towards photo. But I think with me, I write a lot, and I also do it through film, and it's visual. Mostly it's visual. Anyone you may choose may hinder the free exchange of thoughts and feelings. If you choose none, you may risk. Yes, and I agree. Like, memory is it's a hard one to answer for me, because memory, either way, it's my perspective on it, and I have to acknowledge that. And memory has a way of bending towards whatever reality you want it to bend towards. So I have to always acknowledge the fact that it's my perspective, it's biased, it has its own desire and goals and narrative. So it's but yeah, for me, I think more than anything, I collect stories with place. I'm very visually associated with places, so I think that's how I collect them. Usually it's more tied to place.
Okay, that's interesting that you're connecting it to places. But I think the idea of memories, I think, is an important one. And your films are really a journey of memories. I feel like when I'm looking at all of them together, rather than presenting something of a historical truth, or rather there are these moments, these sort of very intimate moments that you are encountering for us, and we are encountering them with you through your camera. And that, I think, by itself is this sort of beauty where you take your audience into those spaces that we otherwise wouldn't have access to, and presenting us with this sort of very, very intimate encounter, which I really love about your films. There's another question that is maybe a hard one, even a harder one to answer.
Yeah.
But Emil is saying that it's great to hear from a fellow Baku-born Armenian American, and there's a lot of points that you have mentioned that Emil can relate to. And he says, what are your thoughts about the future of Karabakh and Armenia more broadly after all of this just happened? I mean, this is a very difficult question, and you choose how to answer that as you wish. But for me as a historian, I'm always a little worried about speculating of the future. But I'm sure you have an insight based on your own experiences in the conflict zone itself, prior to, of course, the war.
Yeah. I mean, prior to the war, I think I'll speak to that maybe more. Karabakh was really, I believe, evolving. I was there in 2019 and I saw so many things happening, the Tumult Center being there. I was teaching a filmmaking workshop that summer, and I found that a lot of the students wanted to stay, wanted to create businesses there, and wanted to grow their identities there. So I really felt like very positive about the future of the country. Now, a lot of those students are in Armenia and they can't even really attend school there. But I don't know. I mean, this is like so hard for me to talk about what the future is.
Yeah.
I hope that, I don't know. I have my own very personal feelings that I don't want to share.
No, of course, that's totally understandable. But tell us a little bit about what are your plans? When will we see Abysm?
Yes.
And what are your plans in returning? Are there plans in the making? What are you working on now besides Abysm? Because I'm sure you have multiple projects and always in the pipeline.
Yeah. So I'm working on a documentary film about a monk that's living in the Tatev Valley of outside of Goris in Armenia. This is something that I was just workshopping at the Berlin Film Festival last week, and I really hope to return there this summer to be able to shoot. It's a short documentary. It's my first one with because my documentaries before have been me holding the camera. So this is the first time I'm bringing a cinematographer. I've done that for my narrative work, but this is the first time I'm bringing a cinematographer to shoot a documentary film. It's about a monk that's been living in isolation for the last 6 years at a abandoned 17th century monastery in Armenia. He's such an exceptional person, and I met him while hiking because I was looking for a location for my feature. I thought this was going to be a good location, and it will be, but then I met this person unexpectedly and started speaking with him and spent the day with him, and I decided he would make for a wonderful short documentary. So I hope to go back to do that. And then Abysm right now is in the fundraising stage. As always for filmmakers, this is such a hard part about raising funds and getting like the financing together. So right now we're getting the resources together to be able to shoot it. It's very important that it's shot in the winter, spring. So I hope to do it in 2022.
Okay.
I know it's quite off, but it has to be, it's quite a lot of planning that still needs to go on there. And hopefully when I have a chance to visit there this summer to make this short film, I will get a chance to go into Karabakh and understand what is physically happening and where we can travel to. Because right now I'm having a really hard time understanding where are the boundaries. Before I've had a very good understanding of it, and now I don't know where we have access to and where we don't.
Yeah, it seems like the geography itself has shifted quite a lot,
and it's very confusing. Like it's still very confusing, and I just don't understand also like what is going on with the army, because I've spent time with them. So now I want to figure out like what exactly is the army structure now.
Sure, and it may not even be the end of it all either.
As
you know, the conflict and the tension continues to occupy the news, and of course the internal sort of discussions within Armenia are also traveling to watch. So I think
Yeah.
there's still going to be lots and lots of changes that we may not be able to anticipate at this particular any moment.
Yeah, Dimitri, any chances of films appearing on PBS? I would love to. I don't have the contacts there, but if anyone has the contacts, I would love to share my work with them. Yeah, I have other narrative films that they probably would be better for that structure.
Yeah, most definitely. But that would be a great coup. So if any of our audience members has linkages
Yes.
to networks, Oksana is ready to share her films, and also graciously allowed us to share the links to her film in our sort of public space, which is very generous. So we really appreciate that.
Please, everyone, go see them on your own time. They're very short, they're very meditative, all of them, but it's better if you watch it on your own because they'll be smoother. It'll be a better viewing experience.
So I want to thank you so very much for being here today and contributing to this series of emerging and established Armenian women filmmakers, and revolutionizing really the artistic scene of filmmaking in Armenia as well as in the diaspora by adding your voices to it. And it's been such a great pleasure getting to know you, and I'm really excited that you live right next door. I mean, not next door, but 20 minutes from us. So we most definitely hope that we'll have you back and showcase much more of your work in our community. So thank you so very much for doing this. And
thank you so much for having me. Thank you everyone who attended. I hope you got, I'm like looking at the list of participants because as I'm almost looking at you, I hope you got a little bit more insight into what's going on there. And I also encourage all of you to go visit Armenia, to go visit Karabakh. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in terms of its landscape, and it's really something to go see.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for being here, and hopefully you'll join us for our next event, which is on Wednesday, I believe, March 24th. Sata Moralian is going to speak around her new book, Feast of Ashes. And so we'll hopefully see you all then. And again, thank you so much for Oksana for joining me today.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Bye.